Hello, and welcome to the MKG podcast. This podcast helps demand gen marketers grow their company's businesses through the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. I'm your host, Carrie Gard, and to help me introduce today's guest, I have our digital marketing strategist, Christina Kay, with me. Christina, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie. I'm so excited for this.
Me too, because I think you are like the perfect person on our team to do this because you actually have sales and customer experience under your belt before you came to MKG, and you actually have a little side gig.
Yeah, and I love it. It's really fun because they really focus on the customer and making sure like you're fitting the whole outfit, and it's not like asking like, how are you doing today, or are you fine, everything okay? It's asking those questions like what events are coming up, or what styles do they like, or things like that, or let's shop for a mom too, or let's shop for your sister, just so getting to know them, because in getting those big experiences in their head, they'll come back to the store and probably spend more money that time as well.
In retail, I've never had that in retail. Usually it is you walk in, they ask you how you're doing or welcome in.
Yep.
And then can I help you find anything? And you don't know. Sometimes you don't even know what you're looking for. So,
or
no.
Yeah, or you have like obviously there's gonna be some people that are just like, but some people like want to talk and they say, hey, I have this work event coming up, or I'm going on a vacation, or things like that. And then if they talk about, this says dry clean only, and then I can be like, oh, we have some like really like easier to manage types of materials. I can like point those out to you, and showing that experience and really giving them that full service treatment, because clothes are expensive and they are like nicely made at the store I work at. So it's pretty cool to give them that feeling of them being the only person in that VIP treatment.
Yeah, and it's taking the time to actually get to know them.
Yep.
On a personal basis. And do you find, money per sale essentially?
Yeah. Yes. So like whenever I really start the conversation with like, hi, my name's Christina, like, what's your name? And they'll be like, oh, hi, my name's Carrie. You can really see one just by that initial conversation, like if they really do want to go deeper with you to see like what they're looking for. And I would say probably like 85-90% of the time my sales get higher once I establish that relationship, and they come back and they ask for me, or they ask when I'm working next. So they come back around the time I'm working. We don't get commission by sales there, but we do have a leaderboard so you can see where you're at. And I'm like a pretty competitive person. So I always like to be number one by the end of my shift, or if I'm closing like by the end of the day. And I divide it by the hours I'm working to say like how much I did an hour. And then I can see how many transactions I had. And then I'm like crazy into numbers. And then I look at the people that walked into the door. In my head, I'm like, oh, I could have impacted this many more people. So just because it's a different outlet than what I do every day at like MKG. And so it's just cool to have that skill set too, but it also helps my skill sets at MKG.
I'm on a single person in building that sell more.
Yep.
But it's also this counterintuitive thing of like, well, you're spending so much time on one person, then are you missing people who are walking in the door, and could you have closed more had you not gone that extra mile?
Yeah. So whenever I am working, it's usually with more people. So we get to kind of move around and have one person like just at this like front of the store, things like that. But I learned time management, or just time effectiveness, I guess you could say, in the sense of sales and managing. Say you're the only person in the store and there's 5 people and you want to sell at least $400 or something like that to each person. You have to manage that time well. And what I try to do is get them staggered at the fitting room. So then when I go back, I can really talk to all of them, like talk to them by their first name so they know I'm talking to them, see how size they're working, if I can pull anything out for them. Or and I usually bring new outfits, or bring new tops or bottoms or a scarf or booties, depending on what's in their fitting room, to kind of add to the outfit. And then from there, they kind of all like, there's a big mirror in our fitting room, and our fitting room is like super nice. It has like couches and chandeliers, and it's like super cute. So everybody loves it, just to like hang out there. And half the time the women just like talk and they come in or they motivate each other too with their outfits, and it's just cool, and it obviously helps me. And then I go back out to the store and like kind of talk, and I kind of go back and forth. I'm pretty much running around all the time, but it does help me manage more than one person at a time and go that extra mile with everybody.
That's awesome. And our guest today, JoAnne Jaspan, actually talks a lot about that extra mile and asking really good questions and taking the time. So today we have CEO and founder of Shift Sales and Marketing, JoAnne Jaspan. She wholeheartedly feels that sales is broken, and she is on a mission to fix it, one sales call at a time. So seriously, folks, we have actually split this podcast into two because I think we could have gone on even longer than the 90 minutes that we did. And I want to make sure that you get to hear it all and get to digest it and walk away with some really good, clear action items on how to take a discovery call. And it's not just the discovery call itself, it's what you do before a discovery call, then how you handle the discovery call, and then how you when the phone hangs up. All the time. Sometimes it does, but not all the time. You want to make sure you follow up. So we're going to split this into two. I recommend you grab a notebook, you take some notes, and you may even, I know Christina, you listened to this twice. You may need to, especially if you find it really, really helpful. So without further ado, here is my interview with JoAnne Jaspan.
JoAnne, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Carrie. Thanks so much for having me on today.
So I'm not a salesperson. That's why I have a fantastic business partner, Mike Crass, and experts like yourself to help me out. However, as marketers, we work with sales teams all the time. And there seems to be this misunderstanding between each side. And I'm speaking for myself. In my own experiences, there just seems to be this disconnect between sales team not understanding what the marketing team is doing and the marketing team not understanding what the sales team is doing, and everybody being a bit frustrated. And so would you agree with that in your experience, or is this just in my case?
Oh gosh, no, it's certainly not just in your case. You're not the only professional to experience that. Sales and marketing, it's sort of like, I make this joke, it's like as old as time, the family feud almost between those two departments. And it really, if you break it down, it makes no sense because both teams are working within the same revenue ecosystem, right? And they're working towards the same goal. So I think getting sales and marketing teams in alignment is critically important for all organizations. And, there's a lot of different ways to approach that and to kind of help to bridge that gap. Everything from just frankly more communication, more sort of consultative approach working together to kind of de-siloing those departments and creating multidisciplinary teams and that sort of thing. But, I think speaking from a purely sales perspective, not talking about that dynamic or that interaction between sales and marketing, I'm going to say something that you may not hear a whole lot of sales leaders say, but sales is really broken, in my opinion. I think that there are exceptions, of course, but by and large, when you look at, sales as we know it today, and when I say that, I'm sort of focusing more on a B2B sale, although sometimes this would apply directly to consumers. But in the business-to-business world, you have to think about it like this. Sales was developed in a different century for a world that simply no longer exists. It was really based on a lot of manipulation and exploitation and, sleight of hand and trickery. And it was just practiced in a really sleazy way, really with no integrity whatsoever.
And why do you think that is? Like, why did it start off that way?
I think it started off that way because it was developed by a very small slice of people that wasn't really representative, of the population. But I think, back then, there's a lot of reasons that go into that, but the idea of selling something was really to hurt someone, take something away from them that wouldn't necessarily leave them better off than they were, right? You hear about like the snake oil salesman, or of course, like our collective psyche has the kind of used car salesman character kind of etched in. We all know that. And, that maybe there was a time and a place. I wasn't, alive and doing sales back then, so I can't speak too much to that origin. But, I think part of what sustained that was, we're talking about a world with very little technology. There isn't a free flow of information. Today's world, we live in this a state of information parity. And what I mean by that is the seller is no longer like the gatekeeper, the magician, or like the Wizard of Oz that, gets to hide behind the curtain with all of the information. The buyer, has free access to tons of information about the product, about the competitors, about different solutions. And so that's really affected their entire buyer's journey. And today's buyer is leaps and bounds, so much more savvy than a buyer even of, 10, 20 years ago.
Well, yeah, we have so much information at our fingertips between the research we can do from reviews, from asking our peers, to not always even needing a salesperson in between to make a decision.
Right, exactly. And I think that free flow of information has, been the seismic shift in kind of the power dynamic between sellers and buyers, where, if you try to manipulate and exploit your customers, they're going to run for the hills, and that's just not going to fly. They're aware of that happening. And, it's interesting. Sales is one of the least trusted professions. There's been an annual poll that's done, I believe, by Gallup, and every year there was one other. It's the second least trusted profession. And in this case, they specified car salesmen, but I think we can extrapolate. The only profession that was less trusted were members of Congress. And we don't need to get into politics here, but that's not setting the bar super high.
That's a whole different topic.
Yeah. Oh, that podcast is down the hall. Sorry, you're in the wrong room. Just kidding. But, I'm just, trust is so critical in sales. So there's a real disconnect there. You hear of, things like, oh yeah, they could sell ice to an Eskimo. And it's like, just think about what that, but that was sort of the mindset.
Yeah. And it's definitely a transition that's happening in our world today, from even just the needing that transparency, because it is all online and we can do our own research. And we're sitting on with a salesperson who's telling us one thing, and then we're going online to do our own finding of the fact that they're telling us something totally different than what their actual customers are experiencing. We're going to lose that trust.
And, I think sometimes it's a little bit more nuanced than that even. It may be more subtle. It may not be that you're telling them like, hey, this snake oil will heal you. And then you can go and check Google and they're like, nope, snake oil, total scam. It doesn't even have to be that sort of extreme. But I think it's nuanced in the sense that a lot of trust can come from our behavior, from the way that we interact with our customers, the way that we sort of bring value to the conversation. I like to think of it like this, in most other professional exchanges, you would sort of start an engagement with someone, maybe, just net neutral, like you'd be at a baseline of neutral. And I think it's important for sellers, to people that are selling, to remember that unfortunately we're kind of starting at a deficit. Like, no one in my knowledge has ever said like, oh, sweet, I'm getting a sales call right now. Awesome. Can't wait to pick up the phone and talk. You know what I mean? Like, so if you ask people like, hey, how excited are you to talk to some salespeople about, even if it's something they're looking for, it's usually not a super positive response. So I think, building that trust, it's more like, that saying like, show, don't tell. Don't say like, oh yes, we're very trustworthy here and we're going to tell you the exact truth. It's more gets relayed in your behavior and sort of the messaging that you're using to engage with a potential customer.
So marketing gives, let's assume that it's a qualified lead. And we're all on the same page in that assumption, which doesn't normally happen. And that's a whole different conversation that you and I have already agreed we're going to have. But assuming that the lead is actually qualified and it gets into a salesperson's Salesforce to say, go call this person. What's sort of the next step in that? Because it's not just picking up the phone. There's some upfront work, right?
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, I think, regardless of the source of the lead, but to your point in this discussion, let's assume that you've gotten a really well qualified, good lead from marketing. I would never advise someone, great, just marketing vetted them for you, get on the phone and show them a demo. Or, I think part of what we're talking about here, Carrie, is process. And then part of it, I think, is sort of conceptual guiding principles. I think that I'll say this, like, one of the main things that if I could impress upon your listeners or those people, your listeners that are in sales, is this really, and this word gets overused so much, so I'm sensitive to use it, but this is really a mindset shift that sales professionals need to embrace. I think, even just looking back at like the Glenn Ross movies or Wolf of Wall Street, always be selling like the customer is kind of like this idiot or this mark that's there to, you're going to like bamboozle them into doing what you want. And a lot of salespeople talk about like the power of persuasion and that sort of thing. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge, sales has changed so much in the last 10 years. It's changed more in the last 10 years than it has in the last 100. But when we talk about adapting to today's landscape and our ever-changing, rapid rate of change that's happening around us, there's still a lot of work left to do. We still have a long way to go in adapting our approach. And that brings me back to the mindset thing. So I think the first things I would say, some of like the attributes or skill sets that really need to be nurtured in salespeople, I have three that I think are really important. One is curiosity. Second is authenticity. And third is transparency. And with curiosity, I mean really showing up with this like childlike curiosity about your prospect, trying to learn, as much as you can about them. And I'll get into a little bit more detail there in a second, but using that to kind of guide your conversations, guide your process is super important. Authenticity, again, I'm sort of bummed. It's such a buzzword. It's so overused, but it's actually a really good word when it comes to sales, because so much of it has been inauthentic. And then just, really being transparent, not trying to, hide information that doesn't look good for your particular sale.
And some of this actually starts at the brand level too, right? Like when we're actually developing a brand or a company or product, talking about those things as core values, as who you are as a brand, and really instilling that across the whole company is a really great start, right? In terms of finding the right salespeople to even come on board in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the culture, like the brand voice really can drive, it's the way that you choose to sort of show up in the world, the way that you want your customers to experience you as a brand. But yeah, it absolutely would drive sales culture as well. And I think that plays a big role in, selling, how we come across, what kind of sales team, sales floor you have. But absolutely that starts with, a brand voice. And I think all of this can kind of fit under the umbrella. Like when I think about that mindset shift or changing sales to adapt to today's world, I think the biggest change that we can make is shifting to a buyer-centric or customer-centric model. And that model really is at the core of everything we do. So if it's marketing or branding, talking to the audience, it's no longer about we're America's #1 tire shop, like we this, or,
right.
we won this award, or we've got the most
It's not about
features.
the brand anymore.
Exactly. It's no longer, I mean, it will become about, those details will come into play later, but initially, like the story that you're telling about your brand is about your customer and what will they achieve? Who will they be? What vision can you prompt for them?
What problem are you trying to solve? Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very much speaking, it's not, you know, hey, we want this, or we think you should call us because we'd make a good solution for you. It's, you know, what they want. So yeah, to answer your question very long-windedly, it does start as a brand, and it starts, that helps the culture, and that helps drive a lot of what happens. So, you know, with that in mind, getting to your question about like, what do you do before a sales call? I think that the very most important thing you can do is to arm yourself with data, like with information. Information is power. And the more you can learn about your prospective company and the actual prospect, the person you're speaking with ahead of time, the better.
And where do you even get that information?
Yeah. So there's a process, you know, that I go through, and you do want to keep in mind that you sort of want to be cognizant of how much time you're spending researching any given lead or prospect. If you haven't, if you have marketing vetted them, but, you know, I'm certainly not suggesting, you know, we tell managers to have their teams go out and spend a couple of hours looking into each, prospect, but keeping a good balance there. You know, we have the great Google machine. Yeah, that's a great place to start. I would often set up like news alerts for a company, but essentially, like from the company perspective, we want to learn as much as we can about their sector, their vertical, their industry, what's happening in that space.
And
have there been any...
And you mean that from a B2B perspective, right? When you're talking from, business to business versus business to consumer.
Yes. Like, let's say I sell, accounting software, and I get a call from aerospace manufacturer, just for example. I don't want to speak to them the exact same way that I would if a Target called or something. They're in different industries. They have different business concerns. There's different legislation affecting their businesses. So I really kind of want to understand like the stage that they're on or the space that they're playing in. I would like to understand. Oh, go ahead.
And again, this might be a totally different conversation that we can have another time.
Yeah.
But just to sort of plant the seed, when you're building a sales team, do you generally have an aerospace industry is huge. It has a million nuances. So I'm assuming that if that's a big vertical for you, you're probably going to build a sales team around that vertical so that they really understand in depth how to talk to that audience versus, like you're saying, a Target or a, CPG company.
Yeah, that's a very common way of structuring your sales team, is to do it, by vertical. So we're looking for someone to sell into healthcare, or we're looking for someone to sell into higher ed or into tech. And then also, not another aspect of that is, territories, because sometimes the geography of a business will impact things. You might say like, hey, I know that this bill is going through legislation right now. It's going to, the law is going to change for California businesses with over 500 employees next month, hopefully you'd be calling before next month, but you know what I'm saying? And so there's going to be geographic specific things too. So a lot of teams will be divided by territory, divided by, vertical. I will just say quickly, Carrie, that I worked at a company where we segmented rather instead by business segment. So enterprise business, medium business, like typical SMB, and then small business. And there were pros and cons to that. The people that hadn't worked under that model before kind of hated it, basically because of what you just said. Like, how am I supposed to become a specialist in anything if I'm constantly talking to all different kinds of companies. But there were some things that I really liked about it. I liked that it kept my job interesting and fresh. And I'm a curious person by nature. I love learning. So there was always something kind of new to learn. And then also it kind of levels the playing field just as far as, if you say like, oh, there was a huge snowstorm at the end of the quarter on the East Coast. So if that was your territory, you didn't make your quota. Do you know what I mean? Sort of rather than being able to spread out. So anyway, that's also probably another conversation. But even if you don't have an industry that you master, in 5 or 10 minutes, you can learn quite a lot. You can Google news in aerospace and just a quick scan. I'm not saying you have to be ready to write your dissertation on this or anything, but having a sense of what shakeups in the status quo are going on. Are there any changes to this industry? Is this industry booming? Is it dying? Are there any key struggles specific to this industry? Understanding that for their location, getting a quick sense of maybe who their competitors are in the market, what their market share is. Are they a big player? Are they a small player? Are there trends emerging? Is this particular company growing? So obviously, if they're a public company, you have access to their financial reporting and you can see that. If they're private, there's some good workarounds to try to get a sense of if they're growing. If you look on LinkedIn, I think maybe it's a premium feature, but you can kind of see their hiring trends. So if a company is hiring a lot, it's a good indication that things are going well and they're growing. If they're hiring is stagnant or has decreased, maybe that they're downsizing. So those are all good places to find information about the company, checking out any industry-specific publications or groups on, LinkedIn or places where those people would be.
Yeah, and it's important to really make sure you're looking at the right thing, right? So for MKG, we get sales calls all the time, but people sometimes look at the wrong website, which drives me nuts. And it's where they'll just type in. And so for the longest time, we finally number one. It took us a long time to do it. But there was another company called MKG as well. And they were always number one on Google. And everybody always clicked on their website. And then they would start talking to us. And I'm like, totally different company, but not the right fit for you. You're completely off base, right? So you do need to make sure that you take the time. Yes, you don't want to take an exorbitant amount of time, but you do want to look at the details. They have my email address. It's mkgmarketinginc.com, and yet you're looking at this is mkg.com. Clearly a difference here. You want to notice the details, right? Because
I'm giggling because woman after my own heart here. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you mentioned that. You will pretty much disqualify yourself forevermore with that company if you do something like that. Absolutely detailed. I'm saying do a quick scan, but take as long as you need to make sure. I got an email repeatedly from somebody saying they absolutely loved my editorial that I wrote on, I can't remember the topic. And after checking out the website, they want to know if I need anyway, it was just so off base. And it was basically when you make a mistake like that, you're communicating several things to the buyer. And this is again, when I said show, don't tell. You're telling them that you're really lazy, you're telling them that this is about you, you want to make the sale. If you can't really take the time to oh wait, it says marketing, but this company makes ice cream cones. I wonder if it's the same one. Do you know what I mean? If you're on autopilot and you're not checking that kind of thing, it's just, you kind of get one. Remember that notion that we're starting at a deficit. Mm-hmm. So nobody's super excited to talk to you to begin with. And if you're open, right out of the gate, you mix them up for a different company, or you show that you just clearly have not done any due diligence, they're dead to me, and so they've totally wasted my time. So,
but when they do go the extra mile and they do get it right, that deficit definitely switches over pretty quickly. At least it does for me. If somebody shows up and's done their homework, I'm okay, let's talk. Clearly, you know about me and you looked it up and you took the time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, in that case, you're communicating all of those things like, oh, you're serious, you're a professional, you took the time. And then again, if we kind of think about, what's in it for them, right off the bat, you may not teach them in a quick phone call or an email something shocking about their business, that they didn't already know. But it kind of situates you more like, I'm not trying to sell something to you. I'm trying to help you solve something, Yeah. So if you come at it as like, hey, I noticed that a lot of marketing companies in Seattle are their hiring numbers are up by 40% this year. And I'm curious to know if that's something that you guys are doing. Are you growing? Like let's say it was a staffing agency or something. I don't know. But yeah, but it shows me like, oh, okay, you know about my market, you know about my competitors, you know about what I do, where I'm located. Like you have a thoughtful question for me about my business rather than like, hi, my name is JoAnne and I run sales consultation and I would just love to speak to you because I've helped millions of other businesses, double their revenue. And I was voted like, me, like snooze, they're gone, you've lost them. So.
And so that's a good point too. I mean, we talked a lot about the company and figure out who the company is, but you do need to have some understanding of who the person that's on the other line too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it can't just be about the company. I mean, who are you calling matters as well,
Absolutely. Right? So that research, that pre-call research and arming yourself with all of those good little nuggets of information, it's kind of two-pronged. One is the company, their industry, their competitors, and then of course, who are you talking to? And this is really big because, the answers to some of these questions are really going to change probably the course of the conversation. Things like, what is their title? So what level are they in the company? Are they a manager level? Are they a director level? Are they a C level? What horizontal or what department are they in? Are they in the finance department or the marketing department? Typically those functional areas have different concerns, within a business. Again, if I sold accounting software and I knew that there was some legislation coming that was going to change the way employees had to track their time or something, and I called someone in HR or someone in finance, that would make sense. But if you're in marketing, I'm not sure that that's really relevant to you. You know what I mean? So I also even try to, as much as you can, try to get some insight into the psychographics of the person. And by that, I mean, don't be a creepy stalker. Don't get on the phone and be like, hey, how'd you like that concert you went to last night? Or, something like that. But without crossing any lines, like I always try to look for where did they go to school? Where do they live? Is there anything I have in common with them? Do we know someone in common on LinkedIn? Like something that I can reference to kind of humanize it. And it goes a long way towards building a little bit of rapport. And again, it just kind of shows, hey, you did your homework. You know something about me.
But also try to find that connection too, right? Like I do this all the time in recruiting. Like I want them to know that not only am I taking the time to say, yes, I think you would be an interesting candidate, but I'm also saying like, we have something in common, whether it's from a similar place we grew up to a school we went to, or whatever the case may be. But having that connection opens up a whole door of conversation that can lead to you never know where.
Yes, Carrie, that's so important. I mean, that groundwork that you're laying there to kind of build rapport, to have something to chat about that you have in common. There's a lot of sort of neuroscience happening behind the scenes there. But here's one way to remember it. Yeah, you're building some rapport. That conversation could open up to who knows what, as you said, like that could lead you anywhere, some commonality. Also, one thing to keep in mind is at the end of the day, let's say your prospect is looking for a marketing company and they're going to talk to 6 companies. At the end of the day, they may not remember specifically your pricing or your process. They are going to remember though, I mean, they'll have notes, I'm sure, but they are going to remember how they felt while they were speaking to you. And it might just be a very like primal, I felt good, I felt bad, but all of those connections that you can make and those conversations you can have, they humanize you, they elevate you out of the like salesperson pit into the, I'm an empathetic person that has something in common with you, and it helps them to, sort of have positive associations about their conversation with you when they think back on it.
And it's again going back to still being, authentic and real about it. You don't want to just say these things for the sake of saying them. It comes from a real place. And I know that, like I said, I am very much not a salesperson, but I do listen to Mike. And one of the things that he does really well is he's like, I want to find common ground. Either this is going to work out and I'm going to be able to help you out, or I'm not. And that's okay. And like, we'll move on. I don't want to waste your time or ours as a company. So, let's find that common ground. Let's see if we can, here's your challenge. Let's see if we can help you out. And I think that's also really important to say too, like in that transparency, in that authenticity of not trying to essentially be that sleazy salesperson trying to get the sale no matter what.
It's so true. I mean, such a critical, good point. And I think, that gets into some of what I was going to mention when we're talking about actually starting the call. But just really quick to kind of finish up how can you find information about your buyer, their company. Any social media is good, but just remember to look both at the company page and at the individual's page. And, if they comment on a thread or something, like pay attention. What are they commenting about? What are they liking? All of these are just little breadcrumbs, little clues that can help fill in the blanks about their mindset, where they're at, what's important to them.
And do you think it's worth getting you mentioned it earlier, but the LinkedIn, I'm calling it professional, but that's not the right word. But
the premium.
Premium.
Yeah, I mean, there's different, there's, what is it? The sales, I'm blanking on the word, sales navigator is the one for salespeople. And then there's also like, I don't know, just LinkedIn professional or business or something that gives you additional insights. And, it depends what other tools you have and what other sort of enablement technology you're using for sales. But I think it certainly can't hurt. And Sales Navigator can be a really great tool to have for, figuring out org charts and who's who. But to your point about, what your partner says, and I was going to say, you're like, so I'm not a salesperson, and I'm going to challenge that, Carrie. You are. Like, everyone is, whether that is your title or not. We are all selling ourselves, in a sense, it's sure. There's a fabulous book called To Sell Is Human by Daniel Pink. I really recommend it. And it's, sort of he touches on that. So you don't have to have that title to be in sales. And just one other thing you said that I just want to pause on for a second. It's that authenticity thing. If you scroll through their LinkedIn or their Facebook and you can't find something in common, figure out a different way. That inauthenticity or that hey, I see that you went to so-and-so. Yeah, I knew someone that once went there. It just falls so flat. And believe it or not, despite, I think a lot of people miscalculate and they think that they can pull that off and their buyer's going to be none the wiser. And it reeks of fakeness.
Oh yeah. It doesn't always work.
Don't do it.
I don't always do it. I only do it when I find that commonality. It's just an extra thing that helps, but don't force it for sure. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. If you have that, if you get lucky and there is a commonality, like you said, absolutely use it. But to your point, don't make it up. If it's not there, it's going to hurt more than help. But so what I would do is once I do that research, I would kind of start to put together a hypothesis. Okay, I think that because of, their competitors just releasing this great new product, they're probably feeling pressured to catch up. That's going to be my hypothesis. Or I think because they just opened 3 new offices, or going through a growth spurt, and or I think because they just got a new round of funding, whatever it is, something that's kind of shaking up the status quo, make a hypothesis about that. But remember, it's a hypothesis. You don't want to go in thinking what they're struggling with or what they're not struggling with. You really have to ask. And that's where that curiosity thing comes in. So,
and should that be in relation, should that hypothesis be feel like I'm saying the obvious, but just to confirm, it should be in relation to your product, right? Or what it is the conversation you're essentially trying to have.
Yes. I mean, hopefully your hypothesis kind of filters into a direct use case for your solution. It
right.
should be one of the value props, or, one of the ways that you help companies. Yeah. I mean, you could make hypotheses, but if they have nothing to do with what you have to offer and there's no way to tie it, may or may not be that helpful, but good point. Yeah. Good clarification. And then, I like to I recommend starting with a pre-call worksheet. You might just write down a few questions that you're going to ask, or your goals for the call. I want to, here's my hypothesis and I want to confirm this, or today on the call, I want to learn how important this is. Let's say you already know that they want to make a change in their CRM, you might say my CRM, customer relationship management tool. You might say to yourself, okay, today my goal on the call is to find out what other priorities they have and how this ranks. It could just be something simple, but you want to learn where they're coming from, and it sometimes helps to sort of have an outline of where you're going to steer the conversation. And it may not go that way, and that's okay, but rather than just sort of going in hey, so, it can help you ask good questions. And I think once the call actually starts, what you described your partner doing is really, really important. I've been on some calls before as the buyer where the account executive or the seller or the rep will just kind of launch in, and I will literally be thinking what is this about? What are we talking about? Maybe my business partner set up the call. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's really important to just, build a little rapport. How are you today? That's great. Oh, hey, start that piece of information that you have in common, chat about it. But then I like to say so, hey, Carrie, thanks so much for making the time to speak with me today. Let me just kind of run through a loose agenda with you so I can let you know, what I'm thinking that we'll do today, and make sure that, we're on the same page. But
I love when salespeople start with agendas. It's the best.
Yeah. Yeah. And otherwise it's how long is this call going to be? Are they going to get to, I have one specific question. Are we going to get there? It just helps them to kind of settle in and know what's coming, Yeah. And again, all of this stuff goes back to that show, don't tell. You can't tell them, hey, I'm a really authentic, trustworthy person, and I'm a professional, and I care about your outcome. You have to show them that. So I might say at the beginning of the call, what I'd like to do is just really learn what brought you today, or why we're talking today, or what you're working on, kind of what's going on in the company. And I also would I would provide a reason, say, and this ties into what your partner said, say, really, I would like for us to just spend a little bit of time exploring whether or not what we offer is the right fit for your company. And the more that we can kind of, the more you can share with me about what's going on, the more I'll be able to help determine that. And, if it turns out that it's not a good fit, nobody wants to waste each other's time. That's fine. And then here comes the thing that, a really common challenge that people come to me with is the closing, closing skills, how to close a call. It feels so awkward, a bunch of different versions of that. And what I recommend you do is you don't wait till the end of the call to be oh, hey, by the way, can we talk again? Or, hey, I'm trying to sell you something here, obviously. But the way to do that really is to start planting those seeds and setting that expectation now, at the very beginning of the call. So I might say, again, thanks for joining me. You've done your little, how are you today report. We're exchanging mutual information, and then say, well, listen, what I'd love to do today is really just take some time for you and I to explore together whether or not our solution is the right fit for what you're solving for, or, for your challenge. And the best way for me to do that is, just kind of ask some questions and chat with you about what's going on in the company, get some information. If we, at the end of today's call, we don't feel like there's a good fit here, then don't want to waste anybody's time, and, we'll part ways. However, if we do feel like this is worth exploring further, there's some synergy here, then I'd like to talk about next steps and kind of make a plan for moving forward. How does that sound to you?
So that's all part of the forecasting. So like as you're creating letting the client know how this call is going to go and having that agenda, that's basically you're setting up the closing as part of the agenda.
Yeah, you're setting it up in that way. Like when you get to the end of the call, by now you'll clearly know if there's no way you can help, and, you're probably not going to schedule another call with them. But if there is a way you can help them, then when you're like, so here's what I do see a great fit here. I think there's a lot of potential, certainly worth exploring in more depth. What I'd like to suggest is, as a next step, we do this, and then they've already been primed, like they know the next step is coming. It's not like, surprise, I want to talk to you again,
And you also gave them an out too. Like if they start understanding the solution that you bring to the table and they don't think it's a good fit, you already gave them an out to say, like, tell me, we're going to have a conversation to know whether this is a fit or not. And they could basically jump in and say, you know what, this isn't the time, or we're not in a place for this, or this isn't the solution we're looking for. Thanks anyway. And basically move along quicker than
yes, absolutely
playing nice, essentially.
Yeah, if they say that right off the bat, like if you're still setting the agenda and they're like, oh no, we don't need this now, that would be worth kind of looking at what qualified them as a lead, where was the disconnect in the communication that they became a lead, if they say that so quickly. But on the other hand, if that's where it's going, the sooner you can figure that out, then you can reallocate your resources, your time and your energy to a different prospect that has a higher likelihood to convert into business, right? So, if that happens. But the other thing I really want to point out is we kind of refer to this as earning the right. So you might say to them, hey, here's what I think we should do today. We're going to chit chat. I want to learn about your company. I want to answer any questions you have. How does that sound to you? And what you're doing there is you're getting their explicit buy-in. Like you're not just assuming that they're down with that call plan,
Right.
And when they go, yeah, that sounds good, then it's like, great. Okay, that's like your first pass go, collect $200, go to the next level kind of thing. If you skip that step, again, it's sort of subtly communicating, like, I'm just going to tell you how we do this. It doesn't really matter what you think so much. Right. And 90% of the time they're going to say, yeah, that sounds great. But I have had people say, oh, no, I just want to get pricing today. That's it. Or, how long is this going to take? I thought it was just going to be and then of course you can address those objections, differently. But, again, like there's a beauty in disqualification. And in other words, if they are not on the same page and they are not invested in having this conversation or exploring the options, learning about your solution and how it fits with their challenge, get them out of there as soon as possible.
What if that doesn't? To your point, though, if somebody does say, oh, no, I just wanted X today. I just wanted pricing. I just wanted, I wanted to know how you're different than your competitor. Do you say, great, we're going to cover that at this point? Or do you say, let's adjust that now? Are you fluid with what they need, or do you try and really stick to the agenda?
I'm fluid because, again, I'm trying to convey the message, like, I'm not trying to fit them into a box. Like, I'm trying to take into account what they need. But if they say to me, if we've never talked before and this is our first conversation, and they say, oh, I just wanted to get pricing today, my response to that would be, oh gosh, I wish I could do that, but without knowing kind of what you're looking for, our solution, there's so many different tiers, or there's so many different variables that, I would just be making a complete wild guess at this stage. It's not something I can just give you. I need to kind of understand, or you might say our solution addresses so many different challenges. Businesses use it in a lot of different ways, and it's priced accordingly. So it's impossible for me to just throw out a number and see what they say. If they're like, oh, okay, then yeah, say like, we'll cover pricing once I have a little bit more information. But if they dig their heels in, I would just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that, because they're probably just quote shopping,
Right. Right.
Like this falls under the banner of testing your buyer, which is something else I recommend. Like if they're not willing, they've got to care as much about this as you do. Like that's a good litmus test. So if they're not willing to spend a half hour you have scheduled on their calendar to tell you about what's going on and to kind of have an exchange of information and ideas, then they're probably not that serious.
Right. They're not quite ready.
About moving forward. Yeah. Or they've already made a selection and their boss said, well, I need you to get 3 other quotes before we make a decision. All right. You know what I mean? So yes. It's kind of testing. And, you know, if they're like, if you explain to them why you can't just spit out a price and say, like, I promise you, if it seems like it's a good fit, we will definitely get there and I'll go over all of the options with you, but it's just premature. I don't have enough information to give you an accurate answer. And that's a really reasonable thing to say. So, you know, their response can kind of help guide that. So as you are going through this call with them and you've gotten their buy-in, I think a few other things that I've seen done that I would recommend you do differently is sometimes a rep will show up to a call with a list of questions that they want answered because that helps them qualify it. So, you know, they might be like, so do you have a budget? Okay, great. And who's in charge of making the decision? Okay. And then it starts to feel like this really shallow interrogation, and it's all about you. You're just getting your kind of quote unquote needs met. And no buyer really wants to engage in that process. So you've got to be careful of that. I tell people I would much rather you not get to all of the things you wanted to know on the first call and instead get some real depth into 1 or 2 things. You know, if you have to choose between the 2, you have to be careful about sort of doing that interrogation thing.
Well, it's like we talk about in marketing when we create a form, right? Do you need the entire form filled out right now, or can you get their name and their email address to get them in the door? And then next time they come back, ask for their phone number. And then next time they come back, ask for their company. So you sort of layer in information about them. So it isn't this, because at the end of the day, you at least want something. It's better to have something than nothing.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you think about like one of the driving tenets of the whole sales process, I like to think about delivering value across every touch point and bringing this conversation kind of full circle to what you said earlier about a lot of the customer-centric messaging coming from marketing and from the brand. Driving value across every touch point means like the first time they visit your website or they download a white paper or they see a marketing message, it's value additive. It's about them, right? And same with this sort of discovery call. Any way that you can make it value additive to kind of get some insight or learn something about their company and say, okay, so I'm wondering if because X, Y, and Z, you know, because this situation is going on, I wonder if that's causing a challenge here, you know, and if you can shed some light or even just make an educated, I guess it's not even really a guess, but if you're really listening and, you know, putting 2 and 2 together, they might not have to tell you specifically, like, this is putting a ton of pressure on our sales department because our numbers are low. Like, you may be able to infer that. And that's when you start to, really grow your own validity or your own expertise in their eyes, and also add some value to the conversation. That's what makes them say, like, yeah, I do think we should schedule another call to talk, you know, a little bit more detail. There's one quick side note I want to make here. You know, when we talk about listening on calls, you know, there's different levels of listening, and I think there's 5, and, you know, the lowest level of listening is not listening, you know, and the highest level goes up to, I think it's called empathic listening. But if you've ever been in a fight with a spouse or, you know, a friend or something, you know, that feeling where you're talking and you can tell they're just like waiting for your mouth to stop moving so they can jump in with what they want to say.
Oh, yes.
You know,
yeah.
that, yeah. Or it's like they're formulating their answer while you're talking. It's the most frustrating feeling. I've been on the receiving end of that a lot in sales. Like, as I'm talking, they're going, and I know they're not really listening. And then they come in with their like canned answer. And don't do that. Like, really listen, really be curious. I also think about it as like that toddler stage where, why is the sky blue? Oh, because it reflects the water. Why? Because the earth is round. Why? Because, it's like, why? I like to think of it. I mean, we're not going to take it quite down to toddler level, but a good discovery, and this goes back to that like checklist that you don't want to do. A good discovery, you're kind of asking vertically. And by that, I mean, you're getting depth. So if I ask you a question like, hey, so you're looking for new accounting software, and you go, yes, I'm not just going to check that box and be like, yep, they have a need. I'm going to say, okay, every answer you give me, I should have 3 more questions that I can ask about your answer to keep kind of driving down and getting to the heart of things. People aren't going to disclose sensitive stuff or stuff that makes them vulnerable or their company vulnerable right off the bat. You have to work to get there. On the other hand, if you really ask good questions and you really listen, your buyers will tell you everything you need to know to kind of craft the right solution and sell to them, or to win their business, I should say.
Christina, after just talking about how you do sales and retail, I got seriously, I want to walk into your store now, because you actually follow naturally a lot of what JoAnne does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it's the most effective, even if it's at a retail store, or if you're selling software, or if you're even selling like a mortgage or something. It's the best way to do it, because otherwise you're just a normal salesperson, and taking that an extra level, pre-sales and post-sales, can get you farther than you can probably imagine.
So you definitely have a lot of experience under your belt, clearly, based off of how you were talking and how you do sales at this retail store. But you did say that you learned something from this podcast, from the first half. And what was the thing that really stuck with you?
Yeah. So when JoAnne was talking about when she's talking to a prospective customer, and she has like an agenda all filled out, and they just kind of tell her like, hey, like, you know what, I just really want to talk about pricing. Kind of turning around that conversation, because if they just want to talk about pricing and not really discovering what the core of what their need is, could be hard. And so developing that language to do that is a very hard thing to do, but also it's needed. And what JoAnne was talking about, saying like, hey, let's take a step back from that and seeing what your actual need is, because honestly, I can't give you pricing because I don't know that need. And if they're just looking at pricing or just wanting to like look at certain things, they're probably not that serious. And I've never thought about it that way, because when I was at a marketing technology company, we had those conversations all the time, from pre-sales and even post-sales when we're doing renewals. And when customers wanted the pricing or wanted this right away, in my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know this. Like, I have to like get so many things going. And having that conversation like, hey, so I understand maybe pricing is important to you, but let's talk about what's important to the business, and if you're the final decision maker for this product is going to be on the call next. Let's see the points that we can talk about to maybe get this deal completed, and it can ease you and me, kind of having that language, because once you're just talking about pricing, it's a business deal, and you want to be a friend, you want to be a colleague to them, and having it in that type of conversation will be 10 times better. And kind of that mindset that JoAnne had is just, for me, it probably would have made my life easier when I was in like a sales type of role. So I really took that and I was like, wow. But even using that at MKG with some of our clients, or even just working with vendors, it is very impactful.
Yeah. And it's nice to figure out, because, a lot of companies, they don't have straight up pricing, especially for our, some of our clients who are selling these massive packages. It really depends if you can take that step back and say, well, what is it that you need? Because if I give you a price right now, I'm going to give you it on the high end because I have no idea what you need, and I'm probably going to scare you away. But
Yep.
if we get to your core needs, then I can put together a package that's explicitly right for you. And chances are it's not going to be as expensive because I'm not going to give you everything. I'm going to give you just what you need.
Exactly, like that perfect package for them, because you probably went back and read other like discovery notes, and having different conversations, it can really give them that package that they can't say no to. When you do that pricing right away, whenever I think of that, it's kind of, they're probably saying it, one, because they have a budget in mind, or they don't have budget, they have to ask for a budget, or they don't really have one and money is not an issue, which is very great if that's your problem. But it's definitely a thing for a lot of companies, that because marketing doesn't get a lot of money, and being that salesperson to a marketer is hard sometimes, because you just have so many things that the company needs. And so looking at it as what can I do for you, instead of this is the price for you.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so we have a lot more coming from JoAnne. This is the first episode of 2. Next week, we will be covering the rest of the discovery call, as well as what you do after discovery call. Because if things went well, the discovery call does not end when the phone is hung up. And so hear from JoAnne on what to do next. If you're already convinced and want to learn more from JoAnne, you can find her on LinkedIn. Her name is spelled JoAnne Jaspan, Jaspan. And reach out to her. She'll love to hear from you and how she can help you build a successful sales team that really does the work to put towards each and every customer. Shoot. Thank you very much, Donut.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this interview. We look forward to covering the rest next week. This is the last 2 episodes of the season. So get them in. Make sure you subscribe, because come next week, we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus over the holidays and come back to you next year, 2020, with 8 new episodes from really, really great talent who's going to help you continue to grow your business in very, very creative ways. So subscribe right now. Do it. Thank you again for listening to the MKG podcast, where we help demand gen marketers grow their company's businesses through the right means, messaging, media, and measurement. 4 M's, as we like to say. Christina, thank you for joining me. I look forward to connecting with you next week as well.
Yes, thank you so much.